patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, civility, the values that define America. Fascinating stories and talks from America-loving patriots dedicated to preserving freedom, opportunity, and justice. Welcome to the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 103 of Friends and Fellow Citizens. I'm your host, Sherman Talosky. Thank you all so much for joining me for the second episode of August 2022. I hope you're having a wonderful week so far as we wrap up the summer holiday season in the next couple weeks or so, and school is just getting started for kids like myself. I also want to make sure to remind you to subscribe to our email list if you haven't already, but the biggest news that we've had in the past week or so is our merchandise store is now open. We have our first two ever Friends and Fellow Citizens products. We have two kinds of handmade, made in USA mugs for all of you to order. That link to the merchandise store is down in the show notes below. But this is a wonderful way to support the program. And as a bonus, as I mentioned a few weeks back, if you have donated $50 or more through our Patreon, you automatically get a free complimentary mug. So there's just multiple ways to be able to support this program, and I hope you will check out our amazing mugs made by a family-owned business in Minnesota. So make sure to also give your support to that business, which has been phenomenal, a phenomenal partner to work with to get our Friends and Fellow Citizens merchandise going. Today will be our first episode on our first New York delegate to the Continental Congress who signed the Declaration of Independence. And that man for this week is William Floyd. Floyd was born on December 17, 1774 in Brookhaven, which was, of course, in the province of New York, Brookhaven, New York. And he grew up in a very wealthy household. His family owned quite a bit of land in New York. He eventually took over the family farm business, but he didn't stay long as a farmer. He was one to have a bit of interest in not just politics, but also the military. And so later, in the earliest times of the American Revolutionary War, he became a major general of the Suffolk County Militia. And through his politicking, through his family and his work, he was able to rise up to becoming a delegate from New York in the First Continental Congress from 1774 to 1776. Later served in the New York State Senate. And Floyd was someone who, unfortunately, for the sake of podcasting, and this is because podcasting is something that was invented so far ahead of the times when Floyd was around. Floyd was not a very vocal person, and I guess when you're not that vocal, you're probably not going to be as prolific of a writer, especially if you're writing about what you've said. So while there's not a whole lot to speak about on what sort of writings and speeches or things he said in the Continental Congress, I did want to point out a few things in during his time as the signer, which I think could really illuminate a bit on the signers and on the importance of public service. Floyd was one to really know how to balance his work on the militia, work on the military, fighting on the battlefield, but also doing that work that seems very bureaucratic work in the Continental Congress. Now, he did work on legislation and on policies that the Continental Congress needed to make during the war. But you would think that with all the delegates, you would think that a lot of times these delegates would have a lot more free reign and that they would be able to voice whatever they would say. They would be able to cast any vote that they wanted. But that wasn't the case for the colonies because each of the colonies had their own provincial Congress. The New York Provincial Congress, unfortunately, had a bit of a problem. On July 2nd, when everyone was supposed to vote on independence, the New York Provincial Congress had not formally agreed on whether or not to vote for independence. They were kind of weigh and say, well, what does independence mean, and what are sort of the risks and whatnot. And because of this slowdown from the New York Provincial Congress, the New York delegates, including Floyd, actually had to wait around. They couldn't say anything. They couldn't vote because they hadn't got that green light from the Provincial Congress back home. And this basically delayed their vote a little bit. It wasn't until August 1776 that most of these other delegates were able to sign that copy of the Declaration of Independence, including William Floyd. And so it was a bit of a hiccup, and I don't really know what the nature of the conversations were when you got certain delegates like all ready to go, and then some other delegates like, well, we can't do anything because we got to wait till so and so gives us the green light. It sheds a different light on the bureaucratic element of the Congresses, because you had the provincial ones and you had the Continental one. And I find it very fascinating that there was a bit of a delay on the New York side of things, and depending on if you know of anyone who lives in New York, maybe that's nothing new for the state of New York. But anyway, I find it interesting how we like to think that everything just went so smoothly, that everyone just went, quick, the arguments and the formalities. Well, there might have been some of that. Much of this was very much improvised. I mean, it was just based on how people were able to react quickly, especially given those times we didn't have that sort of advanced technology that we take for granted nowadays. So just an interesting little fact there. Unanimous declaration, albeit pretty delayed for a month. And in that time, time was of the essence, especially when the conflict was still brewing. Crazy. Maybe some people got fired, but knowing that it's a provincial Congress, probably no one got fired. Anyway, let's move on to what happened with the Floyd estate. So Floyd had built a very wonderful home in Mastic, New York, I believe, and it's so fascinating to see how there's signers who left their homes, left their estates, to embark on this uncertain mission. What happened was that not long after Floyd had become that additional signer of the Declaration of Independence, there was a very, very hard battle on Long Island, which Washington suffered a huge defeat in on August 27th, 1776. And over the course of 3 months, the British would absolutely annihilate Long Island. And from the Society of Descendants of the Signers of the Declaration of Independence website, I read a brief fact that I didn't know about. I knew that some of the signers obviously had to sacrifice a lot, but this is very, very specific here. And because, I guess maybe because of the warnings that the family was able to get, the rest of the family was able to get, but Mrs. Floyd had that time to bury the silver that the family had and flee from Long Island as the British were coming to invade and destroy whatever was in their path. It was so bad that that Floyd, because of his connections, he was able to get a hold of Governor Trumbull. Governor Trumbull actually ordered people to make sure that they were able to bring back some of the belongings that Floyd's family had lost as the British were coming in. The British came in Long Island. They absolutely destroyed that whole part of New York. When Floyd eventually went back to his estate, he found destroyed trees. He found fences burned down, lost livestock, and he couldn't live in his house anymore. It was completely ransacked, completely made unlivable by the British troops. He eventually was able to rebuild not just his home, but really his livelihood, and he really wanted to find something that he could pass along to his family, so he's able to pass along an estate to his son. But he finally was able to build a new home, pretty much the exact same home, but just in a very different part in New York, what is now called Westernville, New York. While Floyd would still be active in politics to some degree, his involvement dwindled in terms of his official positions as a government official. He was, however, a presidential elector, which is someone who votes in the electoral college to vote for the president. So he voted for Washington. He was an elector for 1800 and in 1804. He eventually sided more with the Democratic Republicans. He did serve in the state Senate later in around 1808 or so. He was chosen again in 1820, but he didn't show up, and I'm not sure why. It could be because of health reasons, but the future president, Martin Van Buren, delegate from New York, took his place in 1820. Kind of interesting to see how all these players can play out in different eras. People just know each other, meet each other. It's just those times, just the way it is in politics in Washington, D.C. and in state capitals and wherever you find the government. Floyd was 86 years old, which is pretty remarkable. He lived a very, very long life, and finally, he was suffering. Like I said, I'm guessing that was because of health reasons. But he was not able to serve as much as he could in his capacity. Spent much of that time in the late 1810s, early 1820s in retirement. Floyd passes away on August 4th, 1821. Floyd was known to be a very steadfast supporter of independence, but like I said earlier, he was known to be very quiet, and he just wasn't one of those. He's definitely not a Samuel Adams, let's put it that way. It was said, and I'm not sure if Rutledge had actually said this. Edmund Rutledge was a delegate from South Carolina, and he said that Floyd was one of the, quote, good men who never quit their chairs, unquote. I'm hoping that that's a bit more of a compliment rather than a bit of sarcasm. But Rutledge, what he's essentially saying is, someone like Floyd, he works too hard. He probably just has a different work style and a different way of expressing himself. So it's noteworthy. He's not the only one. Floyd is not the only one who is one of the quieter signers. We've had a couple already covered in this series, but it reflects once again the importance of having people with different skills and talents, not just people who can talk loudly, but people who can actually bring more skills and other skills, like working on bureaucratic issues, which is something that he did. With correspondence, every single signer had all these responsibilities that reflected their work ethic, but also the kinds of things that needed to be done to run this Continental Congress in the midst of the American Revolutionary War. Now, I'd just like to conclude with a couple of quick takeaways here. The first is the story of Floyd's loss with his estate, I think, really highlights the true cost of signing up for an uncertain mission, but a noble one, like what the signers did. I think a lot of times we forget that signing that document, the Declaration of Independence, wasn't just a complaint. It was a way of essentially committing treason. Imagine some of the worst crimes you can think of to be committed in a society. That really is what the British thought of the signers who signed the Declaration of Independence. And to really see the actual cost, not that it's something we want to read about, but to see the kind of cost that a lot of these signers had to go through to have their fortunes completely turned around 180. It really brings about into context and brings about a very powerful message of the importance of public service, and why I'll never forget this story from Aesop's Fables. I can't remember the plot of the story, but I do remember it said a very simple quote: "The more honor, the more danger." It's true for any kind of profession. It's true for any kind of service. And it's something that people need to want to accept. A lot of times I'm seeing people who want to run for office or want to get involved in politics somehow, but they just like, well, I don't really know if I should. What if I say something and this person doesn't like it? Or what if I offend this crowd or that crowd? Well, that's not courage. It's if anything, you need to get out. Or I'm telling these people, right? I would say to them, you need to get out there and you have to almost not care. I mean, you have to listen to others. This is part of civil conversation, but you almost have to, in many ways, just not care about what the opposition says. Because in so many cases, whatever you say, whatever kind of political party you're in or whatever ideological position you're in, you're going to have someone disagree with you. That's going to happen. You can't change that. And so rather than focusing on changing that opposition's mind, why not focus on getting your side as right as possible without gloating, without pretending that you know everything. But that's what a lot of these signers had to go with. They had to definitively say, no, independence is the right way to go about it. They knew that there were plenty of people around the colonies who didn't agree with them, but they had to make their case. They made their case through argument. They made their case through writings, through contributing to newspapers, which was something that other signers were able to get involved in. And it does take a level of humility for sure, and to not assume that you know everything. But this is really at the core of why politics is a very, very tough environment. And I know that people want to get involved in various different ways, and it's very important to know your strengths, your weaknesses, but also to know when to let other people do certain things for you, or to be able to take on certain elements of a campaign or of a piece of legislation. It's just like how with Floyd, it's like putting Floyd, as the Speaker of the House. And that would never happen in a million years, because he's just not a talker. He just doesn't like to say much, and that's okay. He contributed in his own ways, and other people like Washington and Hancock and others were the ones who were more vocal, who were the ones who at least were more willing to be on stage, to be an orator. And that's the way it goes. Just like in any movement, you need to have a full team, and the full team works as one unit. And that's how the Continental Congress we know of was able to put together that Declaration of Independence. The last observation I'll make, and this is something that I saw in Floyd and with some of the other signers too, which is I also believe that politics can never, ever be an environment where someone just goes into office and just serves the exact same role for decades and decades. Now, you could have an official position for years and years. I'm one to lean more towards someone who believes that politics needs to be dynamic in someone's life. One of the things that I've told people is that I personally would love to run for office in the future. Got to see how the pieces play out, but this is something I want to do. But I told people, I said, if I were to get in that position of elected office, I promised myself and my family and my friends, I've already done this because I truly believe it, and I got to just say it so I can be on the record for saying it. I could be held accountable anyway, but nonetheless, I'll believe this for the rest of my life. I truly believe that at some point, probably in my 60s or so, wherever that cutoff point is, when I realize that I've done what I wanted to do in elected office, I'm going to call it quits and do something else. And I think we have largely forgotten that in today's politics. We assume that you have to be a governor, you have to be a senator, you have to be president, you have to be someone at a higher authority to get anything done. Well, yes and no. I mean, on the one hand, you have to have senators vote for legislation, or congressmen, or you got to get the president to sign legislation. You've got to get the governor to send the National Guard to quell something. You have to do these things. It's true. But there's so many other components, so many other ways of serving. And part of that, I think, has to deal with just being able to let go of power, being able to let go and say, you know what, I'm going to let that next generation of public servants take over. That's what I'm going to say if I were to get into office. I would leave office sometime in my early 60s at the latest, maybe earlier, but I really want to make that point of saying I'm not going to be here forever. There's so many times when I see and I get that some people really love the job of being a legislator, being a senator or governor, but you have to, if you're thinking about the realm of public service, you have to think about giving other generations the chance. If you're always in that one same position and you're not changing, if you're not learning, growing, then what's the point? So I just want to put it out there because it's something that I feel strongly about, and something I encourage other people to do, which is not to always do the same thing. They'll realize that in certain times in one's life, because of family reasons or medical reasons or what other reasons, it's good to find yourself in different roles, playing on your strengths, right, and knowing your weaknesses. However, especially on this subject of elected office, I really wish that we can elect more people who made that statement, kind of like a James Polk. James Polk was president for one term, and he wanted it to be that way. So he basically ran. He said, "I'm only going to be president for one term," and everyone's like, "Okay, well, at least this guy's honest." And maybe that's one of the reasons why he got elected, is because he's one of those few politicians, whether you like him or hate him, ones who just say, "I'm leaving office," because you almost never hear that until maybe a year or two before their term is up. And so I think it's vitally important that we reconsider the importance of not just elected office as an institution, but also as a way to give future generations that opportunity, because every single person is going to remember when they got some kind of opportunity, like myself, getting the opportunity to intern for 2 members of Congress when I was in graduate school, and once just outside of graduate school. I'll never forget those opportunities, and I want those same kind of opportunities of people being able to serve, and I'll never forget those older members of Congress giving me that opportunity. I want to do that same exact thing for people should I be elected to office. So regardless whatever path we take in politics and public service, I hope that we give that little bit of extra room for those children and grandchildren. We often say that we do things for children and grandchildren. Why not actually put it into action? So thank you all so much for listening to this episode about William Floyd, our first signer from the colony of New York. I hope you enjoy the rest of August. So just as a reminder, our next episode will be the following month. Will be on Monday, September 5th, with a brand new interview episode. So I hope you enjoy the rest of August, but maybe take a listen to some of our other older episodes. Be sure to check out that merchandise, subscribe to Friends of Fellow Citizens if you haven't already. And as always, a day in America is always better when we are with our friends and fellow citizens.